what this now means for sort of use cases and integrating. So imagine you are like a protocol who has an interesting data storage solution, then you can kind of either think about bringing entire use case to bear on Olas, where that is one component, or you can more act like a developer who brings your component, so it can be composed by other developers going forward as like a data storage solution. You can similarly imagine like a component whereby for instance, we have like some agents which take actions on Twitter or X now. So then the developers compose these building blocks, which are now usable by other developers to effectively allow the agents to kind of do this more effectively.
Welcome to the Deus Ex Dao podcast.
Welcome everybody to another Deus Ex Dao podcast. My name is rture, and today I'm joined by David from Autonolas or Olas. Olas enables everyone to share their AI, and it's basically a autonomous agent economy. And in this episode, we're going to dig a little bit deeper in like how AI and the blockchain works together. And David is the co-founder of this protocol. So he was a perfect guest for us to explore how Olas works, but also in general to have an opinion on AI and crypto. So welcome, David. Could you give a little bit of an introduction about you and Olas?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm co-founder of the core labs behind Olas, which is called Valerie, and I'm also CEO there. I'll talk about Olas in a second. Briefly on myself, got a PhD in economics, specifically game theory, and then after I finished that, I worked more in the sort of data science, machine learning areas in London. Started a own startup, which was focused more on sort of teams and team dynamics using data science to help teams be more efficient and effective together. That didn't work out, and a couple of like junctures led me into this intersection where I'm now, which is that of crypto, but also that of my background in game theory and that of my experience in machine learning and data science. And so that's where initially I worked with Fetch AI, another crypto AI protocol, and doing like their whole sort of AI agents stack back in the day for 2 years. And then since 3 years now, since summer 2021, I'm building Valerie with my co-founders, two co-founders. And our mission is sort of, as you stated, is to allow anyone to really own their AI, in particular, as AI becomes agentic, they are autonomous agents. And the product which kind of facilitates that is Olas. So we kind of core contributors and co-founders of the Olas protocol. And the Olas protocol, as you said, is all about giving people like full ownership about their autonomous agents and have these autonomous agents do valuable things for them. And by doing so, they also contribute to these effectively entire autonomous agent economies, and we can dive into that.
Absolutely. And maybe we should start with just your definition of what an autonomous agent is, because there's a lot of like marketing in crypto that calls stuff AI. Well, it isn't, but Olas is like go-to AI platform in crypto. So yeah, what's your definition of like the autonomous agents in this space?
Yeah, it's a great question and very important. So autonomous agent at the end of the day is not a particularly new concept. It's been a subfield of AI for many decades. And the idea is basically that you have a software system which takes inputs from its environment. It has some sort of internal state and internal logic algorithms that use that information as well as its state to then take actions again in the environment. So at the end of the day, an autonomous agent is sort of um, in a conceptual sense quite similar to a human once it gets super advanced. But obviously today we're not quite there yet. These systems are more basic than humans. But what's very interesting is that in recent years there has been a massive improvement of capabilities around autonomous agents. And one important other thing related to this question is that people talk a lot about AI agents as well, and sometimes these AI agents are actually autonomous AI agents in the sense that they'll do something autonomously on behalf of their owner, which can be like a person, another agent, or an organization. But sometimes these AI agents aren't actually fully autonomous. They're more like functions, as you'd think of, or like workflows. And they do like very specific tasks and then yield control back to the end user. So an example would be like some sort of smart assistant or even ChatGPT, where you can ask it a question and then it will respond, and then again it waits for instructions. So it's quite important to keep those apart. They're obviously both very valuable technologies, but they're slightly different.
That's a good distinction to make for sure, because that means, especially with the autonomous agents, it's super important that you don't have to be there for them to operate. And it's basically automating stuff that you don't have the expertise for, or you don't have the time for. It just automates the boring stuff in that way. So how does this fit in well with crypto and the blockchain technology? Because there is a good fit for that, and there are some claims that even only blockchain technology can enable this, and not like the classic Web2 style closed databases or interfaces. So how does this fit in with blockchain technology?
Yeah, that's a really important question as well. And there's a couple of angles to basically look at answering this. One thing where I want to start before immediately answering it is what I said earlier, which is like there has been quite a change in terms of the technologies which are available to build autonomous agents. One of them are basically decentralized ledgers or blockchains, and particularly the smart contract capabilities on top of them. And one of them are the generative AI models, large language models, diffusion models, other kinds of models. Both of them play a role here in understanding why this crypto AI intersection actually matters so much. But let's answer the question. So if you think about autonomous AI agents that do not have access to any form of Web3, in particular smart contract platforms and the kind of technologies we know in Web3, like verifiable compute, then you're in a world where basically your agent needs to, if it wants to get anything done with respect to payments, for instance, needs to either be whitelisted to do so. Like basically Stripe needs to have like some endpoint for AI agents, or the autonomous AI agent needs to sort of replace like mock the user, right? Like kind of pretend to be a human user in order to get access to these kind of KYC endpoints around banking and transacting. So that's one problem. A next one is that if you think about going to ChatGPT right now, it's obviously a fantastic product. They just launched another bunch of super exciting like features and huge improvements. But at the end of the day, it's a black box, right? There's no way for the user to take any form of ownership over the algorithm and the data. Like we'll come back to the data piece, I'm sure. The third thing is if you then think about this from like taking ownership point of view, not only can't you take ownership, but also you're at risk of being basically rug pulled all the time, right? Platform risk, basically. Like we noticed from the days back when we had like Facebook and these Facebook stores and like apps, and people were building all sorts of things on Facebook, and then one day they switched it off and a whole bunch of businesses died. And whenever I see sort of, like this GPT store on OpenAI, it just reminds me of this. It's a nice toy thing, but anyone who builds a business around this, you can't take them seriously because they potentially don't have a business tomorrow. And then I think a final piece, and that's sometimes really underappreciated, I think, is this kind of limit of composability Web2 architecture brings. So in one sense, like kind of right out of the gate, the composability is often quite good actually of Web2 because they have simple APIs, right? So it's often quite easy to spin up like some sort of service or integrate something because it's all much simpler. You just get an API key somewhere and you get going. But the flip side of this is that the composability is always limited to exactly the kind of composability the designer wants you to compose, right? And Web3 actually, this is the other way around. In Web3, we think about composability in a much more open way. So someone creates some sort of construct, be it a set of smart contracts or be it something else like an entire chain or a set of agents. And they might have some intent as to how it's composed, but others can create new ways of composition on top. And that just creates like much different kind of vectors of experimentations and growth. And we kind of know this from open source. So having listed these kind of 4 problems, right, like taking ownership, the platform risk, limiting composability, and basically cannot KYC, you can already see that like kind of Web3 in a way solves a lot of these. So if you think about the KYC piece, like very naturally, smart contract platforms enable anyone, any actor to spin up a wallet and then engage with smart contracts and third parties to basically get stuff done, be that making payments or more complex things like escrowing things or participating in complex DeFi protocols and so on. If you think about this ownership piece, like one part of ownership is taking control of your software, right, which is kind of open source, is the answer there. But the other part is taking control of your data and your algorithms whilst they're running and whilst they're being used. And that's where Web3 can offer a lot of solutions. Again, tying that back to the last piece, the composability piece, usually they don't come all from one provider. Like you're composing different building blocks to basically allow a user to take ownership of the entire stack, of the entire autonomous agent. And then the platform risk as a result is reduced because if you own your software, if you own your algorithms, and if you own your data, and if the kind of way in which you own them is distributed across different decentralized protocols, which have like transparent like governance mechanisms, then yes, maybe over a longer time horizon, some of them might go and be replaced by others, but at any given point in time, it's very unlikely that you're sort of just going to lose everything as you could in this Web2 world. So I think this is one way to very much motivate that intersection.
Yes, and I think by opening up that design space, we will see like different types of AI products, basically. The question is, where do you start, and do you want to build all of that yourself? So I think that brings us to the point where, maybe you could dive a little bit deeper in how Olas basically helps these creators in having their AI agents on chain, like, and having that coordination between them and or like the data providers or the smart contracts they're interacting with.
Yeah. If I may, I'll kind of, as I'm answering this, I'll quickly have to explain a couple of things about Olas in terms of how it's structured. So at the end of the day, Olas kind of coordinates different types of actors to bring about this mission. And the mission being that we basically ultimately enable everyone to own and run their own autonomous AI agents that do useful things for them. And if you then look at what are these roles, well, one big piece is basically building things. So these are developers who are kind of composing agent software and contributing to the stack and so on. So we have a whole dev rewards mechanism which kind of just speaks to them and basically rewards developer contributions to the Olas ecosystem. So that's one persona or role, the builder. And then you have like what we call the launcher, or like you can think of it like an entrepreneur, who usually is like an entity or person who coordinates maybe a builder and some of the other roles I'll mention to basically bring about a use case, right? And so what's very important for launchers is that we offer this kind of staking mechanism where they can directly sort of target emissions to their use case. We probably need a bit more time to dive into this, so leave it at that for now. The third key role here is the operator. So the operator is then the person or entity who runs an agent. And this can actually, in some cases, be the end user. So we have some use cases where an end user wants to run their own agent, and then they're the operator of this agent, right? But then there's other use cases where the operator and the end user might be disjoint. So the operator just does it for the purpose of basically the rewards of operating the agent, and the end user is like some third party who consumes the benefits of that agent running. So these are the three kind of core role, and like staking kind of addresses the last two roles, the operators and the launcher. The dev rewards addresses the first role, and then we have these kind of other roles as you need in a DAO, like around governance, around sort of spreading the message. We call them the contributors, who's have like a leaderboard and kind of earn points. And then we have also one important sort of DeFi role, which is basically, as Olas is this multi-chain protocol, we basically want to bring the token in a decentralized way to all the networks on which Olas runs. And this kind of DeFi role, the bonder, basically helps, is basically incentivized to bring that liquidity to all these chains so that then the stakers and the developers and so on can all benefit from that liquidity being there. So collectively, basically, the whole DAO is sort of organized into these roles, and they bring about this mission. And so coming back to what this now means for sort of use cases and integrating. So imagine you are like a protocol who has an interesting data storage solution. Then you can kind of either think about bringing entire use case to bear on Olas, where that is one component, or you can more act like a developer who brings your component, so it can be composed by other developers going forward as like a data storage solution. You can similarly imagine like a component whereby, for instance, we have like some agents which take actions on Twitter or X now. So then the developers compose these building blocks which are now usable by other developers to effectively allow the agents to kind of do this more effectively.
Yeah, clear. So one of the components like could be off chain, right? Like, because I think that would be a problem for a lot of like AI engineers and even for like data sources. Like, not all the data or agents are on chain. So then like it's bring your own, and then it can be off chain. But how does that work with like triggering actions on chain, and how is like Olas architected the way to coordinate like also off chain sources?
Yeah, great question. So Olas lives at straddling this on and off chain. And before we answer the architecture, like let's even like think about why is it not purely on chain, let's say, or why is it not purely off chain? So ultimately, if you want an autonomous agent as defined earlier, then this needs to run all the time and needs to have agency over its own actions. And actually, that already means that it cannot be a smart contract in the traditional sense. On a public blockchain, you cannot allow a smart contract to schedule its actions in the future. There's like technical, like it would basically not work as a public blockchain. You can do this in a sort of app chain context. And that's basically what we do. So we have these kind of off-chain agent systems, which basically run all the time, and they have different ways of deploying them. So the same code you can deploy as what we call sovereign agent, where it's a single agent instance. For instance, an end user can run it on an operator can run it on the local device or in the cloud, wherever they please. And that is basically a centralized agent node which takes action on behalf of its owner. That's one deployment mode. So in this case, off-chain, you have most of the logic, and then on-chain, what the agent has is basically a wallet. And if you want, you can then start adding like kind of verifiability components into this. So like there's increasingly many technologies which you can compose there, like be it something like EZKL or like Modulus Labs or other kinds of Giza verifiable compute technologies, which you could then enrich sort of, I guess, like the verifiability of what happens off-chain. So that's in the centralized case of a single agent. As I said at the beginning there, we can run the same code as a decentralized off-chain system. So what do I mean by this is that rather than there being a single node off-chain, there's now multiple agent instances off-chain. And they, before they take on-chain action or off-chain action, they come to consensus. So at all times, those agents communicate with each other, and they form a larger whole, which is the actual autonomous agent in a sense, that then takes those on-chain and off-chain actions. And so you kind of get this consensus between these agents.
Clear. Yeah. So does that also mean that there eventually will be like an Olas chain, so like others can validate these actions, or will you keep like the coordination on chain and then the components like off chain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So technically, we don't need a chain because in a way, every decentralized agent is its sort of app chain in a sense. You can think of it like this. So for instance, let's make it concrete. We have this Olas predict use case. Different types of configurations of agent architectures are deployed in it. So we have three types of agents. One is the trading agent, which trades in the prediction markets. We have the agent which worries about providing liquidity and removing it at the right time, who basically manages markets. And then we have the third type of agent, which is providing research and prediction services to the other two types of agents. And in this scenario, two of the agents, the first two mentioned, the trader and the market creator, they are both of the sovereign type. So it's like basically users across the Olas ecosystem run these agents, and they're being rewarded with staking rewards. We'll get into this. But basically, each one of those agents is its centralized own entity, which runs off-chain, has an on-chain wallet, and takes action. That's like totally sovereign. Like we humans are, right? So it's kind of, you can think of it like conceptually a bit something like this. But then we have this third type of agent called the MEC. And what it does is it is deployed as a multi-instance off-chain agent. So we refer to it as a decentralized agent on the website. And basically, in this case, the agents basically do this work individually, and then they kind of come to consensus before they answer to the other agents. And in this case, they basically make predictions about these markets and then sell them to the trading agents. And so what you have here is that this MEC under the hood actually looks a lot like a blockchain, but app specific. So there's no like public entity who can write to it, but these agent instances which communicate with each other basically form like a blockchain at any given time. And the Olas protocol on the target chain on which this system takes action basically coordinates these off-chain nodes. Now, that's basically the now. And then like, obviously, whether Olas ever has its own chain in the traditional sense that there will be a public blockchain, I think this has to be determined by whether there's a demand for this in a use case.
Yeah, I agree with that approach. I think we see a lot of like approaches where people just have to run like a lot of like validators or nodes that aren't necessary for the network, or they pretend they're decentralized while just a few nodes they run themselves. Or everybody wants to like CK proof everything. Well, it's not needed in some cases. So I think it's more of like a spectrum where in some cases you will see this develop where some dApps or agents are like higher security. So more people have a stake in that, so want to validate that. And then you can have like these separate chains and use cases. Maybe this plays a little bit into this topic of like separate blockchains, but you mentioned the Olas staking before. What does this enable, and is there like a liquid stake Olas, for example?
Yeah, I mean that's a great topic, and that's what I wanted to talk about next as well. So we just talked about Olas Predict, and Olas Predict has done hundreds of thousands of transactions on Gnosis chain in these prediction markets, like all the agents together, and they're all coordinated by this Olas protocol. And so how are they coordinated, right? So I mentioned earlier we have these dev rewards. Well, that coordinates the developers, but what coordinates like the operators to run the right agents in the right use case and so on? That's where staking comes in. And we have the proper Olas staking. It was presented at ETH Denver and accepted by the DAO, and is currently in the final stage of development this week. Actually, it should go into Code for Arena contest next week, and will come live in June. So we have that, but already we have a live version of it, which is what we call Staker Expeditions, and it's a testing program where basically the staking rewards don't come from the DAO, they just come from us core contributor Valerie to test out all the smart contracts, the logic behind it, and so on. And so we can already say how it works and like what works well about it. And basically on this system, at the most basic level, from the perspective of the operator, they have this ability to download an agent, provide it with some Olas, and then basically just run it. And if the agent hits its activity requirements, which it will autonomously do if you keep it on, then basically your agent earns these staking rewards. And so you can think of it like you're sending your synthetic employee to work on your behalf. That's literally kind of what you're doing as an operator. You're downloading the software, giving it some stake, it runs. And from the Olas DAO perspective, that's exciting because the agents only get rewarded for their actual contributions. So unlike in a lot of chains where, like you were already hinting, there's a bunch of validators running something but no one actually doing anything. Here the agents only get rewarded when they actually meaningfully contribute. We call this proof of active agent. So that's from the perspective of the operator and the DAO. More interestingly, what happens here is that we have more, like with proper Olas staking coming live, we will have the ability for a permissionless process of these staking economies being created. So each staking economy is basically a staking contract which expresses these KPIs and the exact agents operators have to run and like how much rewards they get. And these different staking economies basically compete for these emissions from Olas, the protocol. And so the way this works is a bit like in Curve DAO with these gorgeous, where you basically have the V Olas holders, in our case, the vote escrowed Olas holders, the governors. They take their V Olas and they basically can vote or place like votes on which staking contracts they want to see emissions go to. And so that creates a healthy kind of dynamic of competition, because obviously the vote escrow holders are very much incentives aligned with the protocol because they locked Olas for a long time in order to get a lot of voting power. So they want those emissions to go to meaningful places. And these meaningful places can actually be understood because the staking contract quite literally writes it in code. So we're very bullish about this becoming quite a powerful flywheel where the Olas DAO can direct like activity, basically spawn up entire economies of autonomous agents. We think, the potential of this is actually super underappreciated even by ourselves. I mean, if you think about Olas staking right now in the Staker Expeditions, where it's just a test case, we had like a bit of a kink a couple of weeks ago in terms of like the growth there. It was like around 20 stakers or so 3 weeks ago, and then some community members who had never coded anything before, who had like very basic like experience with technology, downloaded these quick starts and were so excited about it that they spawned a whole bunch of like other people through their experience to also run agents. So we went from like this number to filling up basically this entire the entire staking slot. So there's now close to 100 agent instances running at this point, and that's super exciting because basically all these people have to do is stake their Olas and then run this agent, right? But that comes to the last point, which is LST. So obviously, as you can imagine, there is some people who might not want to run their own agent or cannot, or just want to delegate their tokens for others to run it. So yeah, we have outlined this very clearly in the white paper as to how one would build an LST on top of this new staking primitive which we're launching. And we now know that there's some teams who have started working, and I think there'll be some exciting news there in a couple of weeks.
That's cool. And you mentioned that the Olas DAO could incentivize or like steer direction of maybe like some underserved sectors or like sectors that they think will be most valuable for end users or the DAO. What shows like that it can be quite natural where these like 100 users came in just because they were interested in themselves. Is there like any subsector that DAO now is already interested in and wants to, see more development in, or are they still in that phase where they leave that to these users and then they maybe become like opponents for the DAO to steer direction? So it might be too early to steer direction now, but that's something for later on. And now just let the users build, let the users stake and create AI agents. So is there any like sign of direction you want to take already?
Yeah, and I think here we need to always like even where it wasn't clear, it's obviously always a separation between the DAO as a whole and like us as core contributors. So the DAO as a whole, I think now has this fantastic ability that everyone can bring their staking ideas to bear, deploy these contracts, and then sort of start directing rewards to them. And naturally, I think what we'll see, although I don't know for sure, but I would expect that the first economies, when they come live, will naturally get like some outsized return. So there's a bit like this incentives now for people to be fast in deploying their staking economies this summer. So we having these conversations with teams who started building various use cases. Naturally, as co-contributor, we want to come to a point where the system is as self-serve as possible, so that we don't sort of influence too much what is being built, and kind of enable people to, as quickly as possible, get to go. But anyone basically who's listening to this and wants help with this, like, we're there to basically guide you along the way. We have been like very heavily involved in Olas Predict to kind of bring it to the stage, and we see still like a huge potential for Olas Predict to grow further. So a lot of our time is on like further improving Olas Predict, this prediction market use case where there's these 3 types of agents, and making sure that as staking is live, there'll be a lot of different configuration in terms of staking contracts for different types of users to participate in this with different types of agents. One interesting learning which we had ourselves on working on Olas Predict is that it generates a whole bunch of synthetic data, and we are now exploring ways where basically we can bring on board more teams from maybe outside crypto to leverage this data and improve basically the improvement cycle of the agents themselves. Because conceptually, it's very simple. You have like some sort of large language model and some sort of agent architecture at the top. You then incentivize that with these staking rewards to run. You then get these actual benefits, which are the prediction market in this case, and you get the side benefits of a lot of synthetic data, which you then can take back to the top to improve the actual model and architecture. And so this can lead to a basically self-improving loop ultimately. But obviously right now still there's quite a few manual pieces. But taking this conceptual picture, what I'm personally very excited about with staking is that I think we can attract some really large groups who maybe not even in crypto, but who have an interest in basically generating a lot of synthetic data for the use case, where for them, what they care about is the synthetic data, and the use case participants obviously care about the use case. So I see like, what I would like to see basically in a nutshell is like the agent Hollywood, where basically autonomous agents generate entire videos. I would like to see agent university, like agent Harvard, where basically you have researcher agents who are at the level of ultimately professional researchers to write research content. And I think this sounds ambitious, but I actually think it's doable now, and kind of the staking mechanism actually has the right coordination mechanism for that.
Absolutely, and I think that is like a topic I haven't seen a lot talked about in crypto, where you basically have AI agents like generating data, but also like talking to each other, like training each other, like improving. So normally in the process, you just have like the researcher or the programmer training an AI model, evaluating that, and then improving that, which is a fine process and absolutely needed to get this done. But what we've seen in the last years is that you have some of these AI agents just working together to improve each other. So I think that happened with the AlphaGo thing, where Google trained like few models playing against each other, which basically like let them train faster and like not work on only real data, but also like fictional data that hasn't happened in the past, because that is one of the problems with some of these models, that they just are very good at predicting the past or sampling past data, but can't really have some foresight because the future hasn't happened. But if you can simulate a lot of data, there's probably some future scenarios in there that you can train the AI agent and prepare them for. So that's definitely a super interesting a use case of like these models on chain. So that might give like the question like, okay, so we're now early with some prediction markets and agents. What agents do you see in the future, and how does that influence the future of AI and blockchain, basically?
I think it's both a hard question, but also it's important to think about like what we ultimately care about and where we can actually win vis-a-vis centralized plays, right? As a decentralized community. I think the first thing which is clear is that like on a kind of model level, the improvements which you see are all coming from centralized players, right? Even the good open source models, they're like coming from centralized players who have like a current incentive to provide these models as open source. I'm referencing Meta here and some of the startups who are doing this. And so it's like in one sense unclear, at which point I think we'll have like some, let's say, decentralized or distributed training and model provision sort of pipeline, which like inference pipeline, where that is competitive with decentralized counterparts. So that's one thing. I'm not sure when this will happen and if it will happen, but I do think one cannot only look at it from a technical capabilities point of view. You also need to look at it from a what does an end user actually want? Like what kind of applications do people actually want? And there's like the tech history is littered with devices and technologies people thought people want, but they don't actually want, right? Like think about Google Glass. I actually got this new Meta glass the other week, and it's kind of dorky and weird, and I'm still like only occasionally wearing it, but it's kind of fun. But why do I like it? Because it's meta, right? Why do I like it? It's because Ray-Ban, not because it's meta, right? It kind of looks decent glasses, and then there's this little camera. But the Google glasses, everyone hated because it looked super retarded, and people didn't pick them up. And I think what we'll see with agents is that, okay, so you have now these OpenAI app on your desktop, and I think I'm already using it, and other people will use it, and it has its place. But there'll be other kind of agents where people will not be comfortable to give their data and control to OpenAI or some other centralized player, where it will be more important for people to own these agents or own a part of these agent networks, rather than maybe have like a 10% better system, but it's fully outside your control. And so the question is, what are these use cases? And I think I don't have a perfect answer for you, but I think from a Olas point of view right now, it's not so much about necessarily getting the right use case going in the sense of the end users the most happy about like actually using the output of the agent. It's like bootstrapping correctly this kind of interplay between providing use cases where the end user does care sufficiently about the use case. So for instance, prediction and prediction markets, someone needs to ultimately consume them or care about them. But then also you have this element of the synthetic data to bootstrap your overall system. So for Ola, it's very important to find use cases which allow both to bootstrap at a sufficient rate, right? Rather than just have a spike on some use case everyone downloads, but it doesn't actually improve like the overall network of agents. So that's how I look at it. It's very much like take one step after the other, always ensuring that ultimately the mission is satisfied, that people can ultimately own autonomous AI agents fully, that they don't have to outsource that to some third party. Because I think the biggest risk we're facing, like on a kind of global societal level, is that effectively we go back to some sort of feudalism where there's our overlords who have created these models and basically have the better versions and extract all the economic rent, and the rest of us are kind of the suckers who basically rent access to these models and maybe get like a universal compute slice, like Sama was saying, which I mean that all doesn't sound very appealing, right? I don't want to just live on the behest of like some sort of techno emperor.
That absolutely, and I think this is one of the strong points, like where the AI and the blockchain would work together. I think because the blockchain is that open database, you can monitor the models, and you can also like say like, hey, these models are wanted or not. As like an operator, you could say like, okay, let's shut this down. Maybe as other agents, you would say like, hey, these models like I don't want to interact with, and these models I can. But that's only possible because you're not shielding that data off and like these actions off. So I feel monitoring itself is a bit overlooked in crypto. Like a lot of protocols aren't even talking about it. It's all about like the possibilities. But at some point, we need to also have like some levers to pull the brakes on these models if they either spiral out of control or just in general they're just not functioning as we would like to. So is that something you're thinking about with Olas too, or do you leave that to the end user to monitor and take that control over these agents?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's different levels of intensity of like how you can think about this question. Very basic if you want a functioning use case, like you need to even be able to see like how is your ML pipeline basically doing, and like there's shifts there, right? Because you're not working in a fully deterministic environment, so you will have to continuously observe this. And actually, this is another big challenge with decentralized technology. In a centralized, warehouse use case, you like kind of have this all sort of plugged together, and then you have some observable dashboard, and you kind of centrally controlling all of this, and you just look at this one dashboard. in crypto, there's some challenges there because often you're not like controlling everything, or there's like some decentralized parties running some part of the compute. You don't even know what they're doing, and maybe in a good case they'll show you like some sort of verified output, some trace or something. So there's very practical challenges to this on the low end of the spectrum, which I think make for great startups actually. And then on the more intense end of the spectrum, right, is like this kind of question around like alignment of these agents, and then like one day some form of AGI or whatever. I think ultimately it's, well, I think it's unlikely that there will be like sort of one model that rules us all. I think what's more likely is that what we'll see is like kind of competition between different agentic architectures with various models behind them, and that basically we need to start thinking about this problem much like a societal problem with humans. It's like a societal problem of AI systems where, you know, you have some systems sort of observing others, and you have like them incentivized to do so, and sort of have more multi-agent systems approach to it, rather than like, you know, these single kind of centralized systems doing things. But I think we're like super early. I mean, this is, we're talking like, I think this is the other thing which is totally underappreciated. I think people have not grasped the fact that we're at the shift where, yeah, like the robots are coming, but the robots, a lot of those robots won't actually be like physical incarnation of robots. I mean, those will be there too, right? Like, but there will be a lot of more like software agents who just do things on our behalf, and we need to think about like what's the police for them, you know, what's the court systems for them, like all this kind of things which we have in human society we'll need to have for these kind of systems as well. Because often they'll act at a very different speed to us. So you can't just sort of say, okay, when there's a problem, let's have a human look at it. Well, this might be way too late. So this is super exciting. And I literally think that, you know, if you think about it from a total addressable market point of view, you have occasionally Google like autonomous AI agent, total addressable market, and you just see rubbish because they're like so small brained versions of like what people think this will be. But like ultimately, if you think about it in the broadest sense, like every human, every organization on this planet will have many of them. So effectively, like like a huge chunk of global GDP will be sort of attributable to some form of autonomous AI agent somewhere. And yeah, I mean, this has massive repercussions. It's like way beyond Olas, right? Like we're just like one part. We're trying to offer one solution here, which is that we coordinate people to build these systems as open and as co-ownable as possible.
And why is that people don't get that yet, how big this can be? Is that because it's mostly just developers working and they haven't seen like a good end product? Is it like because it's not like an actual robot, but they have to imagine that something is happening on a computer, which is always a little bit harder to do? Like what's, you know, a few simple reasons why you think it doesn't play into their imagination yet?
I think we often way too focused on what we see as what we get sort of situations. Like you can see this with this obsession now with everyone talking about, like, you know, I think talking wallets, like smart wallets, which basically you can chat with, is like the latest craze. Everyone, that's what people think when they think about AI agents. And like it is a use case, right? Like it is handy if I can chat with my MetaMask to do some things. But it is not like, I think we're very over indexing by our basically UX development, right? Like we were used to basically consuming content in the web, and then we started interacting with content, which is basically us doing like all these kind of Instagram, Twitter, all these kind of like hugely like reactive kind of applications where you're scrolling and then like occasionally tapping something, but like kind of really bound into the loop, right? It requires the human to be there to interact with the product. I think we're still very much with our mind kind of indexed to these kind of experiences. And so also when you hear like kind of surface level thinking, and a lot of surface level startups actually who are building like stuff in this space, who are like capitalizing on the latest craze, they'll build stuff which is very much like in this interacting paradigm. You go to some site, it's basically a different version of ChatGPT under a different name, right? You chat with this thingy, it gives you something out. I mean, there's a use case, like very clearly, this is a massive use case. But I would say in the pie chart of use cases, it's actually the small one, because the autonomous one is very clearly, if you think about human time, right? Like 7 billion humans, X amount of time in the day. Well, that's the amount of use cases they can consume. Once you think about autonomous AI agent, like there's no limit. Like there's only literally the limit of energy. And so this is, I think, like a conceptual, like just issue where people not easily like obviously understand things which they can't experience. And these autonomous AI agents are by definition pretty much out of sight. And like you maybe occasionally consume some of their benefits, like your wallet balance goes up, or it writes a research report to you, or it generates a movie for you, or these kind of things. But otherwise, or like just goes and does your job ultimately. But a lot of this is sort of out of sight. So I think we're in this learning phase where humans are going from one UX paradigm to a new one, which is this like more outcomes focused products rather than just these interactive products. And obviously none of the previous type of UX go away, right? We're still reading books. We're still going to use things like Instagram, but these new kind of products are coming along, and people need to learn that they exist and what it means.
Yeah, in that aspect, it blows my mind how fast this went. Like this next evolution in machine learning and AI. So yeah, we'll see. It will need some time to settle, to find new use cases, to settle in like the modern culture, how that enables people to work or interact or be entertained or have tasks automated. Final question: like how is Olas, like how will Olas win and like grow their protocol over time, and maybe also like how can developers or users start contributing and reach out to you?
Yeah, so last one first. So if you are interested in contributing, go to olas.network, where you can basically find the section called Get Involved. It's the domain CTA, and you can find these 6 roles I spoke about earlier, and each of those roles has like very like actionable things you can do. Like developers, there's these very straightforward like initial development paths which you can take to get involved and earn rewards. Similarly, for the operators, even more simple. You basically just download some software and run it. So I would hugely recommend anyone listening to just go to olas.network and get involved. The other thing to follow is Autonolas on at Autonolas on X or Twitter, where every week the autonomous service called Contribute will post a collection of things which happen throughout the week. And if you engage with the Autonolas Twitter account by @ing it or by using the hashtag Olas Network, then you can also start contributing. You earn points on the Contribute leaderboard. So that's another very straightforward way to get involved. And then for where Olas goes, well, personally, obviously I'm only a small cog in this now large system, but I would see a lot of emphasis on staking and like the whole like economies we can create. As I said before, totally not appreciated. I think people are so indexed on human to machine interactions. Machine to machine interactions are unbounded. So yeah, this can, it will explode quite dramatically this summer already, because we can see this now with the staking contracts. It's basically a matter of configuration, and I'm very keen to kind of explore the technical limits of this in the short term. And I'm sure we'll run into some of them, just like onboarding so many people into running agents and all the stresses that puts on the systems and the technology, and then kind of fixing them and growing from there.
Awesome. That's I think a good ending. Yeah, so visit those websites, see how you can basically contribute to the network. I think there were a lot more topics we could have discussed, but I think that's the interesting thing about like AI and AI agents currently. So let's pick up that conversation another time because this space goes so fast that there's probably in a few months something totally different that we can discuss. But that's the exciting part. So thank you, David, for coming on, and thank you for listening to another Deus Ex DAO episode.
Thanks for tuning in to the Deus Ex DAO podcast, a place where some of the most progressive and innovative builders, thought leaders, and traders in the crypto space come together to discuss all areas of the crypto industry. Whether you're into DeFi, Layer 1s, Layer 2s, NFTs, or anything in between, we've got you covered. And as a reminder, nothing said on this podcast should be construed as financial advice or as a solicitation to buy or sell any digital asset or security. The comments, views, and opinions expressed by the hosts or guests on the podcast are their own. As always, you'll need to do your own research.